call to order this working meeting of the Morrisville Planning and Zoning Board and ask if there's any change to the agenda from the staff side.
There is not. There is not.
Thank you.
I do need to call the roll.
Thank you. Marty, if you would do the roll call, please, make sure we know who's here.
Member Acharya.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Langston.
Aye.
Member Michael.
Aye.
Member Roebuck. Member Sack.
Aye.
Member Toterai.
Aye.
And Chairman Pritchard.
Aye.
There is a quorum.
Thank you. So we have all the regular members, so the alternate members will be participating but not voting this evening. Do we have any general public comment? Let's launch straight into item 4 then, which is the proposed zoning ordinance. Michelle, will you lead that off?
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Pritchard. Attorney Greg Jones from Ansel Glink, the consultant working on the project, will be presenting this to you this evening. But as a reminder, this is a comprehensive update of the UDO sign regulations. It's in response to actually the 2015 Supreme Court decision in Reeve v. Town of Gilbert that talks about content neutrality of signs. So it is a very different way of looking at signage than we're used to, with a lot of the typical names that we're used to referring to real estate signs and things like that, necessarily needing to be changed to make sure that the sign regulations are not based on content. But at this point, I'd just like to hand it over to Attorney Jones. He will be going through the proposed code with you this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I would like to thank the board for calling a special meeting tonight. I know it's not easy, especially now, to find free nights. But I am excited to be here to discuss the proposed sign code updates. And Michelle, before I get too far into this, the presentation, do you have that on your computer, or how do we want to run that There we go.
Yeah, sure. I can advance the slides for you. Just tell me when you want me to go to the next slide.
That's perfect. Thanks so much. We'll start here. So tonight, as Michelle kind of touched on already, we're going to be talking about the comprehensive update to the sign code. So we'll start with a quick refresher on where this project stands and recap the town's outreach efforts and summarize some of the feedback we've received through those outreach efforts to date. The bulk of tonight's time is going to be dedicated to a section-by-section review of the proposed changes to the sign regulations. And I'd really like tonight's session to be as conversational and meaningful for the board as possible. So there's going to be an opportunity for board members to ask questions after we discuss each code section. But you're also welcome to interrupt me at any time throughout, as my kids do on a daily basis. Please don't be shy. If you have questions, speak up and we can get them addressed while we're working through the presentation. And then we'll also provide an opportunity at the end for any questions you might have forgotten to ask during the presentation to get addressed then. Next slide, please. Okay, so this details our progress and the steps we've taken to date. This effort, as Michelle noted, began back in 2017. We've had several touch points with the PZB since then, most recently a brief presentation last month at the August 13th meeting. Also, it presented the key issues report to the board back in late 2017. The key issues report was kind of a synopsis or a diagnostic of everything that's right, wrong, or could be done better in the sign code. And that key issues report really kind of informed a lot of the changes that we're going to be discussing tonight. We've also presented the key issues report to the town council for feedback. And again, the discussion tonight, the code that was going to be or is going to be discussed tonight, accounts for the feedback from the PZB, the town council, and the stakeholder engagement that we've had to date. So tonight we're going to do a deeper dive into the proposed code changes, and we are, just one last note on schedule, we're hoping or targeting a potential presentation of the updated sign code to the town council during 2020. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just a quick note on stakeholder engagement. Like any code update effort, it's important to engage and solicit feedback from the folks who use the code and are affected by the code. And the town has used a variety of outreach methods to engage the public on the sign code update effort. These have included in-person interviews, feedback, soliciting feedback over email, direct feedback, the town's website, social media feeds, and the town's regular publications, including Next Week in Mooresville. Now, we worked with staff to target folks that are most directly impacted by the sign code on a daily basis. As I'm sure the board can appreciate, not everyone in Mooresville is aware that the town has a sign code, and most residents, it's probably safe to say, don't have a chance to meaningfully engage with the sign code regularly or in many cases at all. So recognizing that reality, we worked to identify people that rely on and use the sign code on a regular basis. These are the customers that work with staff when they need a sign permit, or developers or property owners that are trying to negotiate sign regulations when seeking plan development approval from the town, folks like that. We collaborated with developers, property managers, realtors, sign company representatives, the chamber, and of course, town staff, PZB members, and elected officials as well, just to make sure we had a good feel before we got too far into this process about what was working, what wasn't working, and what could possibly be done better. The stakeholder feedback we received was meaningful. By and large, these stakeholders thought the town's sign regulations were both fair and reasonable, and particularly when compared to regulations enforced by some of your neighboring communities. So we took this feedback to heart, and as Michelle mentioned earlier, we really focused our sign code update on making sure that the regulations were user-friendly and consistent with recent Supreme Court law regarding content neutrality. There were not a large number of substantive changes to the regulations. That was not the goal of this update, and particularly after speaking with stakeholders who indicated that the code was working pretty well. Legalities aside, the town entered this update effort with an eye towards not creating a whole bunch of non-conforming signs. We didn't get into this to change regulations where that would require signs that have been up for years or longer to have to come in and either change the size or seek approval from the town for something that doesn't comply with these regulations. That's not our effort, or that's not the idea of the update. Instead, again, we're focusing on content neutrality. As the board, I'm sure, appreciates, signage is a form of free expression, which is protected by the First Amendment, and that's the effort, or that's the focus of our presentation here. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we are going to move into the sections of the code. So with the background out of the way, and the town's sign code, like many sign codes, starts with broad general concepts and then progressively gets more focused on specific types of signs and specific signage issues. And the purpose section is about as broad as you can get. It addresses why the town regulates signs, what authority the town is relying on to enact and enforce those regulations, and the general scope of the sign regulations. Admittedly, the purpose section doesn't get a whole lot of daily use. Staff doesn't spend a lot of time when they get a call from either a sign company or a developer or someone else with a sign proposal looking at the purpose section. But despite the fact that it's not used all that frequently, it's critically important if the town ever faces a legal challenge to its sign code. The purpose statements contained in the code often frame the town's actions, their decision to either approve a permit or deny a permit or approve it with conditions in the proper legal light. So an example, this section expressly states that the town is enacting these regulations to preserve the right to free speech expression. These are core First Amendment principles that come up in most, if not all, sign code challenges that make it to court. This section also states that the regulations do not suppress free speech in violation of the North Carolina or federal constitutions, and that the town is enacting these regulations to establish or based on an important and substantial governmental interest trying to advance by enacting and enforcing these regulations. Purpose section goes even a step further to generally explain what that interest is. And that is namely protecting pedestrians, motorists, property values, and public health, safety, and welfare. I told you that this section was broad and general, and there perhaps are no more broad or general terms than protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. But again, it's important that this is in here. As a governmental entity, many, if not most, actions you take are intended to protect the public health, safety, and welfare, and the code needs to state that. The current sign code failed to address many of these subjects, which doesn't make the code illegal in and of itself, but it certainly doesn't help the town if you wind up in court trying to defend your ordinance. The code also failed to expressly treat non-commercial messages on the same footing as commercial messages, as is required by Supreme Court practice. So the updates to this section accomplish a couple of big things. First, they explain why the town is regulating signs in the first place. And second, they provide a legislatively approved basis for the town to defend itself if it's ever challenged in court. That's all I have on the purpose section of the code. I'd like to open it up to see if any board members have any questions.
I have a very, very minor comment, Mr. Jones, that
Sure.
in scope 1B and in authority
Yes.
section C, you specifically refer to motorists. Just a minor comment. You know, not everybody drives a motor. Some people are pedestrians, cyclists. Just a very, very minor point. You might want to just rethink that one.
That's a good point. And certainly, you know, one of the big things that comes up with signage is it distracting to people, whether they're driving or walking or biking. So I think adding references to cyclists, as you suggest, is something we can consider.
Anybody else wish to comment on this section?
Chairman, I just put a comment in there.
We're just...
It would really be...
There we go. So we recognize Sanjay. Go ahead.
The only comment I had was it may be helpful to clarify that the existing, given what you said earlier, that, you know, it's not about regulating the existing signage. So it may be helpful to kind of articulate somewhere that the existing signage will be grandfathered until, you know, whenever the permit expires or new ones are issued or they need to renew. And some verbiage to kind of state that in so many words.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the way we approach the updates are to minimize to the greatest extent possible any type of need to grandfather anything at all. So the way the regulations are drawn are, you know, you had a sign that was approved before, and it was approved for 20 square feet on the front of your store. The town did not change those regulations to now require that the sign only be 15 square feet, and it's got to be located on the west-facing side of the building. So we're cognizant of that and attempted to avoid the whole grandfather discussion altogether by keeping the substance of new regulations consistent with the substance of the current regulation.
Okay, thanks.
I think Section 9 addresses non-conforming signs, right? So that would address any grandfathering type issues.
That's correct.
Any other comments, questions on this section? So, Mr. Jones, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Michelle, could we advance to thank you very much. So this next section, as we again move from general to specific, gets a little bit more precise than the purpose section. The applicability section addresses what signs require a permit, which signs don't require a permit, which signs are exempt from the sign code's regulations altogether, and which signs are prohibited in the town. The current code addresses these topics, and the revisions that we'll discuss tonight seek to build on that current framework, albeit in a way that is content neutral. For example, the current code doesn't require property owners to come to the town to get a permit to put up a for sale sign in their front yard. The proposed code still doesn't require a property owner to come to the town to get a permit for these types of signs, although we no longer call them for sale signs, we call them yard signs. The term yard sign is content neutral, unlike the term for sale sign, which is content based. The content based sign only says for sale on it. The yard sign definition is broader. So this is an example of how the new code changes the way the town regulates, or changes the language the town uses to regulate without altering the substantive regulations and what you can actually put up on buildings in town. Other changes to the applicability section include adding language, clarifying that conflicts between multiple code provisions, and it's typically a conflict between the sign code and some other portion of the UDO that is, hundreds of pages away, will be resolved in favor of the more restrictive regulation. This is intended to help staff address arguments over which regulations apply. Sometimes you see applicants who are particularly good at doing their homework, and they'll try and find a different part of the code to claim that, no, this applies and you have to let me do it. So this is just another tool in staff's toolbox to help ensure that the purpose and intent of the code is honored. And we've also expressly incorporated the government speech doctrine, which is a First Amendment principle that's developed through case law over many years, into the code. So what is the government speech doctrine? The First Amendment, as the board likely knows, protects freedom of speech, doesn't allow municipalities to regulate signage based on content. There is an exception, which is called the government speech doctrine, that provides that if the government is the speaker, or the government is sponsoring the speech, even if the speech is partially advanced by a private interest, that it's okay for the government to regulate the content of the speech. So that's all very nebulous. Let me give you a couple specific examples. This comes up in the context of frequently street signs, and I'm not talking about street name signs, but more traffic control devices. It comes up in the instance of town-sponsored events, like, for instance, a lot of towns will sponsor a 5K or a charitable event, and it comes up with increased regularity with public art displays, where towns will hold a contest for different types of sidewalk displays, whether it's sculptures or sometimes painting on the sidewalk, things like that. All of those generally qualify as government speech, depending on how they're structured. And having this exception for government speech, the government speech doctrine in your code, allows the town to embrace and pursue those perfectly normal signage options without having to be constrained by the First Amendment principles of otherwise. Finally, the applicability section also updated the UDO to remain consistent with North Carolina statutory law concerning political signs. You've likely noticed that there's numerous references in the code to political signage, which includes both candidates and issues. So it's not just as narrow as vote for Bob Johnson. It's also ballot issues, political signage. The definition of political signage is broad and ever changing. There are cases that address this and continue to come out. So we wanted to make sure that the regulations the town is enforcing are consistent with those that the state has also adopted. Those are all my comments on the applicability section. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has about this section.
Any board members wish to comment on that? Well, I have a couple of comments again.
Sure.
So let's suppose you live in a cul-de-sac. You're at the end of the cul-de-sac. You're holding a yard sign. your neighbor at the head of the cul-de-sac has very kindly allowed you to put a directional sign saying yard sale this way. If I read applicability C-3, it says temporary signs installed in conjunction with a valid special event permit are exempt from the requirements to obtain a sign permit. So do I have to get a special event permit for my yard sale before I can put a directional sign up?
And Greg, if you don't mind, I'll speak to that. A special event permit would not be required for that type of activity, so no.
Okay, so
These
somewhere
are 5Ks, cultural activities, business promotional activities, fireworks. Those are some of the types of activities held in town that require the special event permit. So what we're saying here is if you need to come and get a special event permit as part of that process, you need to show us what signs you're planning on displaying and just folding that into that special event permit review instead of having two separate applications.
Okay, thank you.
And just to piggyback on that real quick too, if I might, Michelle, the section 516.2C1 talks about yard signs. It exempts specific types of signs. And, I don't know what the yard sale sign would necessarily look like, but I would suspect that it would likely comply with that yard sign exemption because the town staff doesn't really have an interest in, reviewing permit applications and putting process up for something as temporary and simple as a yard sale.
Yeah, I see that. So the issue was, okay, you're okay for the yard sign on your home that's at the end of the cul-de-sac, but it looked like the temporary sign that was directional wasn't permitted. And if I go on and look at section 3, item D, it says no sign shall be permitted that directs attention to any business located on any premises other than the premises where the sign is located. So
Sorry, are we still in applicability, or have we moved on?
I think it's still under section. Still under applicability, I think.
Okay. You said 3D as in David?
So it's F as in Foxtrot, and then 3, D as in Delta.
Oh, F. Okay. I missed the F. F3D. Okay, so yeah, this section is intended to address billboards. For a number of reasons, you can't really call them billboards. But they're generally referred to as off-premise signs, and this would prohibit that. There's allowance under the temporary sign regulations, which I think is section 516.5, that is, provides for these temporary events to occur. So in the case of a temporary sign, you've got a yard sale that's on a Sunday, the sign goes up on Friday. The code is designed to have staff default to the temporary sign regulations and not the broad billboard ban that's located in this section.
So the temporary directional sign can be off-premise.
Yes, but for content neutrality reasons, we can't call it out and say temporary off-site directional sign is okay because then you've identified exactly, you're regulating the sign based on what it says, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid.
I'm with you. Okay. So sorry to be so picky here, but go back to same applicability section, D is in Delta, item 13, any sign that is attached to benches, I think you're saying that's prohibited. So can somebody not have a dedication sign on a park bench somewhere?
So this section D13 states any sign, whether permanent or temporary, that is attached, tied, or affixed to benches, bus stops, shelters, planters, utility poles, traffic sign poles, refuse containers, rocks, trees, or bushes, unless permitted as a light pole banner sign, are prohibited. So the intent here is to prohibit signs from being, painted on or pasted on your bus stop signs, or if you have bus shelters, or tied to trees, things like that. There is there's not an exemption for memorial signs on a bench, although, the sign code generally applies to signs that are visible from the public right-of-way. So, there's two ways to handle it. One, you can expressly attempt to carve out benches that aren't visible from the public right-of-way, or staff can, take a light hand on administering this and acknowledge that there's other signs, including addresses that are less than 2 square feet, that are exempt from the regulations altogether. So there's ways to allow it to happen, albeit dedication signs, again, for content neutrality reasons, are not expressly called out.
And Attorney Jones, if I could as well, under B3 exemptions, it does talk about non-illuminated signs with letters less than 2 inches tall and less than 1 square feet in area. That was intended to capture a lot of these small types of signs. There is something that also says that's not legible from an adjacent street, but there could be all sorts of small informational signage, a variety of it out there, and the intent's not to regulate those sorts of things. So the bench example could potentially fit there. And then Attorney Jones, if it was something government-sponsored, would it fall under that exemption as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So if the town or any other governmental agency had a program where, and you mentioned parks, so if to put plaques or allow plaques for memorial reasons to be placed in the park, and that program is administered through the governmental agency, it could potentially qualify as governmental.
Okay. Chris, I think you have a question.
Mine was more.
I'm going to recognize Chris Roebuck here.
Mine was more general in nature, just clarification around the political signs. So, Michelle, maybe this is more for you. As I look at all of the signs, it seems like if it's political after an election, 30 days, anybody can remove it. Does the city, by habit, go through and remove hundreds of signs and then, assign 2 people to a truck to remove them? Or are people actually removing their signs when they post them?
So it ends up being a combination. After election, a lot of individuals will go around and pick up their own signs. If they haven't been picked up by a certain date and time, our code enforcement officer does typically do that.
And then there isn't a penalty for that, correct?
We have not assessed one in the past, no.
Thanks.
Recognize Lee Langston. Lee, go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. So I guess the whole bus stop thing. So imagine some crazy future one day when we have transit. I mean, this seems to mean that we couldn't sell signage on our own bus stops within the town.
Well, does the town own the bus stops?
I mean, I don't know how that would work necessarily. Maybe it's owned by the transportation authority and not the town. I don't know how that would, maybe there's one on a public, inside of a shopping center. Who knows?
Sure. So if it's the easy one, I guess, is if the town owns them or a governmental agency owns the buses or the bus stops or the benches by the bus stops. You can set up a program, and if it's set up properly, it's not that hard to do it. You can claim that that's governmental. And you can lease that space out. You can monetize it. There are examples of communities that do this, across the country. So, yeah, that's possible.
All right, and then the other question is about political signs, which is my biggest pet peeve, and this is a very timely point to have this meeting. One, we're not even enforcing the stuff that we have in there now, but I noticed that in the general statute, it talks about signs can be no closer than 3 feet from the street, but we haven't repeated that back into our ordinance. Was that on purpose?
No, not by design. There are other regulations in the statutes that aren't in the code. We tried to highlight the big ones just because it makes staff's job of enforcement easier. There are countless times when a candidate or someone supporting an issue, will challenge staff on their determination of where they can put the sign, and we tried to put like the greatest hits list in the code so staff can have the conversation and point to it and say, this is why. But it's a fair point. And just because it's not in the code, though, doesn't mean that the town can't enforce it. You've got authority to
Right.
enforce it.
I mean, I feel like, this is a relatively long document. 2 or 3 more sentences is not going to kill us to just repeat it straight
right.
in there.
Yeah.
And the thing kind of goes, there's a reference to not replacing or obscuring another sign. So how is that even enforced? I mean, people put signs in front of signs, in front of signs, in front of signs. Some are the same people, some are different. I mean, I think sometimes they do on purpose to block another sign. That's not in there. And then, just in general, the whole thing about blocking or impeding sight lines. We've got signs right now my own neighborhood, people put signs in our median. I would love if there's some way to ban all signs in medians. Because people put them right in the middle of, there's a concept called the sight triangle that you have to leave open at the intersection. And people are putting signs in sight triangles. If you have a smaller car, I used to drive a Mini Cooper, I couldn't see over those signs.
Yeah.
Not everyone drives a huge SUV. And we've got people, I just wish there was some way to make this a little more clear and rein this in a little bit. We don't need to see 8 signs of the same person or candidate, at every intersection.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And we're happy to take another look at the statute and see if there's other stuff we can pull out and highlight in here. Part of the balance, too, is, always got to be sensitive to staff's enforcement resources as well. Political season is silly season, and it can eat up all your time if you're spending all your time out there enforcing.
I feel like people would, obey the rules. They're trying to run to make laws. You'd think they could obey the current ones, but I think we have an issue in Savannah where we have a median that I believe is actually owned by Savannah, and people put signs in it. They've actually damaged our irrigation in the median that we had to pay to fix. I would love it if there was some way, like I said, if we could put ban of all signs in all medians. I don't see any reason to ever have a sign in the median that's not a directional traffic sign. Do you?
Well, if I'm running for office, I can see why I'd want it, but yeah.
So Vice Chair Langston, the code outside of political signs does ban signs in the right-of-way. So that would include signs in a median. With the political signs, though, as Attorney Jones indicated, we're following state statute there.
Okay. But how is that? I guess there's a lot of places. How does that not impede the view of traffic? I don't understand how they. To me, that's a pretty broad thing that we can use. It's a state law to help. Like I said, I'm surprised nobody's ever been mowed down because you can't see over the signs. It's crazy.
Any other points, Lee?
No, I think that was the main. That's the main.
Okay,
how about? I have noticed people putting up wooden signs, not in Morrisville, but in other areas. Is that an issue? I think they were just under the 864 square inches, but a wooden sign on the side of the road is. Also seems like it could be a hazard as well.
You're talking about
out of plywood. Yeah, like a 4x4 post, like with a big wide, 2x4 base, like constructed with plywood.
Yeah. So the statutory law doesn't limit the materials that you use. And there are instances where the town would have an interest in going out and maybe contacting whoever put the sign up and telling them to either move it or secure it, particularly if it's located next to a sidewalk and it looks like it's about to fall. There's a regulatory role the town can play there. It's just difficult to prescribe that in the language of the code itself.
All right. Yeah, that was my comment on this.
thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
So, Sanjay, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I have a question follow-up on what the chairman asked about yard signs. I've seen a lot of people put yard signs around the town, not just on their property or nearby. Are there any ways to, and those could be on public property, right, around the town hall that, hey, there is yard sign further down in the community, whatever. Is there any, is that permitted? And if so, if not, how do we document that?
So the code I'll address the first question. Yard signs, non-political yard signs. So that can be buy mattresses here, you name it. There's these ones, they just pop up generally everywhere. The draft prohibits them from being located on public property, as long as it's not a political message. So those are addressed in. Similarly, if you got the situation like the chairman described earlier, where you have a yard sale, the only way that the chairman is going to be able to advertise for his yard sale on his neighbor's property is if his neighbor consents to. So it's kind of a degree of common sense, and the market will work it out. But to your bigger question about signs posted on public property, the code does not allow this.
The second question was around signs on vehicles. So we have got vehicles parked in the community or just traveling through the community, whatever, however you. Is that specifically called out in the code somewhere? What kind of signs you can have and what kind of signs you cannot have?
Yes, although we got to be careful when we say what kind of signs we can have and what we can't.
Yeah, I don't mean in content terms. Well, I do have a question around content later on, but this was more about the signage itself.
Yes, so the code defines vehicle sign and prohibits it, and the vehicle sign definition is it's likely what you're talking about. It's the basically the driving billboard or the old UPS size truck where they've just painted stuff on the side and then they park it in the shopping center parking lot and it sits there. That's not allowed. So we've addressed that and banned that.
And that I would guess extends to private vehicles sitting even in communities, even though they are not on public. I mean, they are on public streets, not necessarily in somebody's driveway.
Yeah, that's correct. So even if it's parked, the shopping center example, the shopping center's parking lot's private property. Even if that vehicle sign is parked prominently in the parking lot, it's still on private property, and the town can cite and enforce that activity.
Okay. The last question was more related. This probably is in the political space or goes to the content part of it. Hate speech. I know it is still, First Amendment right, but is there anything that talks about what's the limitation on free speech? Can I just put in, whatever hate speech words I want on a sign and put it on my property or public property or anywhere?
So yeah, it's a great question, and it's a common question that unfortunately does not have a precise or fully satisfying answer. The draft code prohibits prohibits signs from having content that's banned, that's not protected by the First Amendment. So indecent, immoral nature, incitement to violence, unlawful activity, defamation, fighting words, lawless action. These are all forms of speech that courts have come down and said, no, the First Amendment does not protect this. Unfortunately, the process of determining that that speech is not protected by the First Amendment is incredibly fact-intensive. So what happens in most, if not all communities, is when this unfortunately does happen, staff sits down with their attorney and looks at what the sign says, reviews it against applicable case law, and makes a determination at that point as to whether or not the sign can stay up or needs to come down.
Would it be appropriate to put in some verbiage that, I think I see you have content prohibited by First Amendment is in there. So that should be okay. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
That's all, Chairman.
Tim, I think you had a comment or a question.
Yes, I just wanted to quickly go back to the political signs, specifically around Section 13B4, where you're talking about placement. Wondering why we have that first part in there, except at street intersections. So I understand why folks would want to have a bunch of signs there, but why not have that same 500 feet apart and basically have that as a one sign per individual or per message instead of having that littered with on the corners there. And the reason I suggest that is I think Lee made the point about some of the smaller vehicles, it does become a hazard. I actually can speak from experience on that when some of the corners where they have those cluster of small signs, even though they're short, they do create sort of a challenge when you're trying to navigate a turn. So that becomes the question: is can you increase that to have that 500 feet apart even on the intersections?
So a couple points. This language in this section was taken from the current code. So this is currently what the town's enforcing, but what I'm hearing is that it's causing some concerns and problems and potential safety issues, especially with cars that aren't as large as other cars. We can take a look at the statute to see if there's any latitude here to kind of disperse these. My recollection, based on last time we looked through North Carolina's political signage laws, is that this is consistent with what's in the statute. But we're happy to take another look and see if there's any other way to kind of mitigate the impact. Because I agree, it's focusing the signs at the intersection, and that's typically, from a traffic safety standpoint, the most dangerous part of anyone's trip, whether you're a pedestrian or a driver or a cyclist.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add to that, and we could go back and take another look at this to confirm, but I believe, as Attorney Jones indicated, that this matches up with state statute, which regulates all of the state roads. And as you know, we have a lot of state roads in town. It was about 2 years ago, I believe former Director Tanner brought forward an amendment to our political sign regulations so that town roads and state roads were being treated the same, because treating them differently had caused some confusion. So we are applying state statute, not just to the state roads, but the town roads. Just putting that out there, that seemed to clarify, but is not something that we have to do.
I love the fact that our politicians can write an exceptions for everything that they need and enforce all kinds of other restrictions on citizens.
So on that note, let's move ahead. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Okay, Michelle, if you could push me ahead one, that would be great, please. Thank you. Okay, sign maintenance. This is a new section. It's not currently in the town sign code. Instead, the town generally relies on its property maintenance code standards to enforce sign maintenance issues, but the property maintenance code typically applies more to buildings and properties and not specifically to signs, so it's kind of a square peg round hole fit in some situations. So we prepared this section to enhance the town's enforcement capabilities, and the code introduces maintenance standards specific to signs, designates when a sign is considered abandoned, which is a great tool to bring outdated signs into compliance with current requirements. And it also provides regulations addressing sign finishes, positioning, damage related to signs that are mounted to a building. These are frequently, nailed in or bracketed in, and when you pull the sign off, then the facade is left with either weather streaks or holes, things like that. This enhances the village's ability to ensure that the building is put back in the condition that it was intended to be in and originally approved in before the sign went up. So again, the town is currently relying on its property maintenance code to accomplish many, if not all, of these goals, which is perfectly fine, but this section provides a more precise and, in our opinion, effective enforcement tool to target some of the issues that staff had raised during our conversations. Does anyone have any questions on the sign maintenance section?
I think we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so section 516.4, this is addressing specific sign types. And this section governs or provides regulations governing most permanent signs that are located in town. Currently, in the sign code, these regulations are somewhat scattered throughout. So one of our first efforts was to try and consolidate them into a single section to the extent possible and organize these regulations in user-friendly tables that folks can pick up and read and understand without having to flip to cross-references and other sections and figure out what's allowed and what isn't and where they can place their sign. This section contains a lot of content, and it helps to keep in mind here. I know we've mentioned this several times already that the town is not making significant changes to the substantive sign regulations. So bulk, location, size, things like that, are largely the same as what is contained in the current code. And also it helps to remember that the town wants to avoid creating non-conforming signs as a part of this effort. And, both of these approaches were influenced by the feedback that the town had received during the outreach efforts that the code was fair and reasonable and working pretty well for most people. So most of the regulations governing the size of signs, where they can be located, how many signs can be posted on a property remain unchanged. The sign types that you see displayed on the slide, ground-mounted, wall-mounted, projection fascia, bracket-mounted, these are consistent with what's in the code right now. We've incorporated graphics, updated graphics to help communicate a lot of these sign content in a way that's, again, more understandable. And we've focused our efforts really on making it more user-friendly and making these regulations content neutral instead of content. One change that we did make of note is the current sign code regulates signage based in part on the type of business that's located there, and we've discussed the problems with that. So instead of taking it to such a specific level where we're talking about signs associated with a type of business, we've removed it 1 degree up. So now instead of being at 10,000 feet, we're at 20,000 feet. And the code relies on zoning district designation as basis for determining what types of signs are allowed in what locations. This is a much more defensible position to take. This is, you're getting that much farther away from a content-based argument. Zoning districts allow a whole bunch of different types of uses. So it would be challenging for an aggrieved sign permit applicant or developer to claim that the town has violated the First Amendment by only allowing this type of sign and this zoning. Again, we incorporated graphics to help communicate the sign regulations, and this section also acknowledges just a past practice from staff and a current practice actually from staff that the sign regulations for planned unit developments are treated differently in many cases than the sign regulations for properties that don't have the planned unit development. So we just wanted to include language in the code to clarify that that's the case. Michelle, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thanks. So we touched on some of this already. The sign types have stayed the same in an effort to minimize nonconformities. The bulk regulations, talking clearance, height requirements, right-of-way encroachments in certain zoning districts, things like that have largely remained unchanged. And again, acknowledge planned development district signage. There's a lot of content in this section. I would be happy to answer any questions that the board has.
If you could indicate if you need to make a comment. So none from board. Sorry to be picky again.
No need to apologize.
So I'm on page 5-160. Can you find that? And specifically there, you say that description, freestanding sign, not legible from a public or private street. And the same on page 161. What's the point of a sign that's supposed to help people find things if you can't see it from the street?
Well, I think, and Michelle, you can jump in here too, but I think the idea was for larger developments that have, expansive parking lots or internal service drives that aren't necessarily a publicly dedicated street. These signs would be used in that case. And if you have a development that is visible from the public street, then you've got ground-mounted signs, a different type of ground-mounted sign, that would be permitted. So we're trying to acknowledge, this section tries to acknowledge site characteristics as much as anything else.
And so with this section, I think part of what's trying to be accomplished, and if you believe it needs tweaked, let us know. was more of your kind of directional or directory signs. I think we have some at Park West Village, some I believe at the Shiloh Glen Shopping Center, which are your larger developments. You drive in, and then there's signage that directs you to certain businesses. Now, the two I just mentioned are planned developments, so they have their own established sign code as part of the planned development. I think we also have one maybe at Grace Park at the Circle as you pull in there. So the intent of this is to address that type of signage. Now, if you feel we've missed the mark, we can obviously, look at making some adjustments, but that is what we were trying to achieve.
Okay. Well, I'll think about that some more. Maybe you will too. So I think in here I've realized then that if you have a subdivision, that has its own what people call a monument, so the entrance. So that's not. Which type would that fall under? Would that be type A?
Yes.
So not attached to any building or structure, but it could be attached to a wall or...
It would be ground-mounted sign type A. So we're saying per zoning lot, which really means for that entire subdivision. If we want to say per development as opposed to per zoning lot, open to talking about that. But two, so you could have one at each entrance.
So if you have 3 entrances, for example, Kitts Creek has at least 3 entrances. Again, I don't want to tie up the whole board, but that's just some of the question. I did also wonder about historic plaques because they're typically on a pole sign, but they're government, so the government can do what it likes, right? So we're covered there.
Correct.
Okay. I think we're ready. Oops. Vice Chairperson Langston, please go ahead.
Thank you, Peter. So on the ground-mounted signs, I didn't see anything in there that has any limit to the number of individual sort of, I don't know if you want to call them sub-signs, panels, whatever, for individual businesses within that development. So just kind of circling back, and I don't want to keep picking on them because I noticed they're the ones that the only people that submitted comments were for Bethany Village, but the Bethany Village sign is extremely busy. It has, 20 different individual sub-panels on that sign, almost to the point where you can't really make out any of them from the street. It's so busy that you can't see any of them. Now, I understand you can't, they want to have everyone out there so they can be seen, but that is just not a very attractive sign. Whereas you have other places, like the ones that just went up at Wegmans, very good-looking sign, the ones at Park Village, nice signs because they limited the number of individual panels. I guess, is there no way that we can sort of restrict that?
So there is legally. There's nothing prohibiting you from establishing a limit on the number of panels. The trick and the challenge is I think what the chairman touched on too just now, talking about the number of signs at residential entrances to developments. What if a development has 3 entrances? Is 3 signs okay versus 2? Where do you draw the line on the number of panels? Because it really, each development's different. So there's a way to do it. What we've seen in practice in a lot of communities is obviously every community has problem signs that just don't look good. And it's unfortunately not possible to eliminate all of them, but the market does play a very strong role here because businesses that have a sign that can't be read or isn't attractive, that doesn't work for them. Everybody wants exposure on the sign out by the road, but if the exposure doesn't actually, generate traffic into the site, then it's not worth it. And we've seen over time that landlords and businesses kind of come to that realization and self-regulate to a certain extent regarding the number of panels out there.
Yeah, but I think in this case, they're asking to have electronic video boards to put up there in their comments. So I think they're going to self-regulate in the other direction, not necessarily in a direction that is, in my personal opinion, better. But there's nothing in here that says like the Park West couldn't redo their signs and put 50 different individual names on there, because maybe they even have more than that. I mean, it just makes me, I'm wary of that.
I hear you. And I mean, again, there's no panel limit. There is an overall size limit. It's a law of diminishing returns. You can stick a bunch of panels up there, but nobody can read them. And then, the other comment on electronic signage, there's a separate section that addresses that, which is a little bit more permissive than what the town enforces now, but it's still real conservative. And I know, and you're always, anytime you do one of these, everyone's going to come out and ask for an electronic sign.
Yeah, the point I'm talking about is asking. They are evidently not in a zoning that is in this, and they're asking to be included in that. There's comments that we've got from them. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Sanjay, I think you had a question or a comment.
Thank you, Chairman. My question was around, I didn't see anywhere any restrictions or permissions to put a signage on a road, just writing down on the road itself. Is that something we need to address? It's not a sign that goes on a window or on a building or on a yard, but it's something that you just basically write on the street or on your pavement or driveway or anything like that.
Yeah. So there's a couple. First of all, you can certainly prohibit that, and we could add that to the prohibited sign location section of the code. Right now, it reads: "In no event shall a sign, whether temporary or permanent, obstruct any road or alley or sight distance area, sight distance triangle." So, I think there's a reasonable argument that if you are, using bright colored paint on a street, that is an obstruction. I think there's an even better argument that someone who's putting a sign on a public road has just defaced public property and can be cited for many things other than what's in the sign code. And the town certainly would have the authority to prosecute those folks and remove the sign without any apparent legal consequences. So this is kind of a confluence of several sets of regulations. The town has a lot of control over public property, including streets. And if someone wanted to do this, the town would likely be well within their rights to remove it and potentially cite the person.
That's a statement around public property. Right? What about private property? My driveway, for example.
So your driveway? Well, we don't have anything in here that would prohibit, someone from taking chalk out and doing a hopscotch on the driveway or something more nefarious. There's, that's a little bit trickier. Because you're not really obstructing anything. There's not a clear public health safety concern associated with someone riding on their own driveway. So that would probably be a bit more of a stretch to write in here.
Well, maybe, instead of going to 4 different statutes to figure out what is permitted and what is not, and then do you think it is advisable to at least put a statement in there that, any kind of signage in bright letters or whatever on public streets or public driveways are not permissible? Something to think through.
Yeah, we could think about it. Again, if it's on the public part, that's easy. We could do that. It's just, and I guess there is the public apron of the driveway, across on the other side of the sidewalk. That could be addressed too. It's just once you cross the sidewalk onto the private side.
It's a different story. I understand. But at least, or you could at least put in something that says, for example, if I put in something in bright neon sign, that even though it is on private property, but can be obstructive to somebody who's driving by, some verbiage that could kind of alleviate that particular situation.
I hear where you're coming from. Yeah, and I think that the public street thing we can address, and I hear you on the bright distracting signs too. And we do have some language in here that addresses that, but I think it's a worthwhile exercise to take a look at it and see if we can shore it up to more precisely hone in on what you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Josh Michael, I think you had a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I was just going to comment that I think that before we really start looking at the, intricacies of sidewalk type of signs, things like that, that's a slippery slope. And you mentioned hopscotch, and I could see just this slippery slope of kind of a curmudgeon busybody, going to the town about Johnny and Susie putting up a lemonade stand and, just taking up time for the town that's not really necessary. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh.
It's a fair point.
Anybody else wish to speak on this one? Hearing none, let's move on to the next section.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. Okay, so Section 5.16.5 regulates temporary signs. And there were a lot of changes in this section, again, around language more than around substance. But the code's temporary signage regulations are content-based, and it's probably Exhibit A on the list of content-based things in this code. The sign types currently are regulated based on the message they contain. For example, the current code regulates real estate signs, which advertise real estate, home garden, produce sale signs, promotional event signs. All of these are content-based. You have to look at the sign and read it to determine whether it's allowed or not. So now is a good time for the town and every other community that has followed this regulatory approach, and it is most, not many, have done the same thing, to imagine a different way to regulate. So the new code reorients the town's regulation to look at temporary signs, not based on their message, but based on content-neutral variables. So the new code regulates sidewalk signs, which, in other words, are signs located on a sidewalk. Yard signs, which are signs located in a yard, and fence wrap signs, which are signs affixed to fences, as just a few examples. This language is both content neutral and defensible. And the draft sign code also regulates the same variables that the current code does concerning where signs can be placed, how long they can be displayed, and how many signs can be located on a property. So nothing is really changing there from a material perspective. And the draft code also includes construction standards for temporary signs to encourage, and this is a point that was brought up a little bit earlier, but to encourage temporary signs that are more durable and less susceptible to deterioration in the elements. These mattress signs, which seem to blanket the country from coast to coast, that are stuck on primarily in rights of way, they're made of quite possibly the cheapest material, and any decent rain will, cause them to tear or get knocked over or be sopping wet. So the town, with an eye towards, both acknowledging the temporary signs are a necessary evil, but B, trying to make them look a little bit better and hold up while they are out on the property, recognizing that they're going to be out there, has incorporated some material requirements or guidelines to help make sure that these signs hold up a little bit better. Like the code's regulations for permanent signs, the temporary sign regulations in the draft are also based primarily on zoning districts, not on uses. So that's helpful. It gets us, again, another degree away from content-based regulations. And we've also added graphics to illustrate the concepts contained in the temporary sign regulation section. One drawback or challenge, however you want to characterize it, of using content-neutral language to describe signs is that it's less descriptive than the content-based regulations that we're all used to. Everybody knows what a real estate sign looks like, but the term yard sign is a little bit more nebulous, and that's why it's important to define these sign types as we have, and include graphics to illustrate the concepts, so people aren't left scratching their head or picking up the phone and calling staff with questions that otherwise could be answered with a more effectively drafted code. That's all I have on temporary signs, but I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Chris Roebuck, go ahead.
My question is around temporary banners for fencing. There's phenomenal technology right now that it used to be for construction, you would have a blank gray. Now you can do high graphics cells materials. You can make them 29 stories high and fabricate buildings. And people use them in your yards now too, just for holidays. And they have whole wrap signs of scenery. I wondered if that was worth permitting, because I come from the construction side and we like those signs, and we really push the limit to what you can put on those signs with crisp, clear graphics, and they're just the fabric wrap that attaches to the fencing. So that's just something that you might want to consider controlling, so that you're aware that somebody's planning, 1 square block of construction, and that may potentially be there for 2 years, and they're going to have the potential to change it every month and put new cells materials, new ideas. That might be something for the city to consider, that if it's plain, you don't need a permit, but if you're going to add graphics or text to it, you may want to have some advance notice what that's going to be, particularly if it's going to be on the edge of some of the residential areas. They might not want the big, because we assume now they're going to be 4 foot high, but really they're enclosing their entire construction in other communities, that they can build them the whole 4 stories high to surround. So if you don't have any barriers around that limitation, that's what's coming into the communities now. They look really great, but,
yeah.
but you might want to have some permits around it.
You're not biased at all on this, are you?
I'm giving you a heads up. This is what's going on in other
I'm
places.
kidding. Yeah.
But
I'm only kidding.
It looks like it's built. I mean, it's phenomenal what you can do on these silk screens over the fencing now.
Yeah. No, I've seen a few examples of them, and I agree. It's advanced much more from just the Johnson Construction Company banner that used to be hanging on the signs out there, which didn't seem like that long ago. Just a couple quick points. The fence wrap regulations are, as drafted, only allow the signs to be up during an active construction permit, which is how we discussed numerous ways to potentially regulate this in a content neutral manner, and we thought that was one effective way. If the board feels that that's a bit too open ended, it's possible to explore introducing a shorter time frame. You could say during an active construction permit, but in no event any longer than 6 months, for example. And I'm picking numbers out of the air. That's something that we could potentially look at, although there are some statutes that actually address some of this too, oddly enough, that we need to be mindful of. I'm less excited about trying to draft regulations that distinguish between a sign that has text and a sign that has messages. That smells a lot like a content-based regulation. So we're mindful of that too, and just trying to navigate this strange world that we're in now that the Supreme Court has changed the rules.
Yeah. And as Attorney Jones indicated, for better or worse, depending which way you feel about this, general statute does address fence wrap signs. So we would need to go back and take another look at that to see if there's a way, to scale some of that back a little bit, or if it's just anyone could put anything on it they want.
And certainly you could always be changed in the future, but I just wanted to give you the warning. That's what's coming into the future, and everybody's really embracing it.
Okay. Sanjay, I think you had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is perhaps not a section-specific comment. It was more, I was just thinking more about, as we do the town center, are we going to allow everybody to do whatever signage they want, however they want, or is it going to be more, structured, defined, so that, there is some pattern to the madness, if you will. Like we go into currently, one subdivision has one way of putting in home numbers on the various homes. Some other division has some other method for putting it. Right? But when we think about the town center, which is something we want to develop, how are we going to think about it? Right? It's perhaps more to do with UDO and how we define the planning there, more so than the sign code itself. But something for us to think through.
I think we find some of that, do we not, under the zoning district, which is town center. So there are some regulations there. Any comments on that, Michelle?
Yeah,
Yeah, so the Main Street district, it was purposely set aside as its own district. In the existing code, the Main Street district, the TOD district, and the NAC district all follow the same regulations. But with the idea that Town Center and the area around Town Center that is zoned Main Street is kind of anticipated to have its own unique look and feel, in the proposed code, the Main Street district was separated out. So those regulations are distinct and different. For the most part, the signage that's allowed in that district is a little bit smaller than is allowed other places.
So
no ground
I thought I heard
permitted along Carolina Street, which was part of the prior code as well. If you're on Carolina Street, with the idea being, this is going to be a downtown walkability, so you're looking for wall signs, awning signs, projecting signs. You don't want each development or each business to have a ground sign. So the code, old and new proposed, would prohibit that on Carolina.
So we are indeed going to keep, zone-specific signage, is it? I thought we were trying to get away from.
No, it's okay to have signage regulations indexed to your zoning district. That's like the 20,000 foot view. What's less defensible and more problematic is if you're regulating the signs based on the use. So gas station, restaurant. That's more specific. Zoning districts allow, a wide variety of uses, and keeping your sign regulations up at that level is a good and defensible approach.
Okay,
Any other
thanks.
board member comments? Any other board member? So again, me being picky, Mr. Jones, forgive me, but at the beginning of your
Again, no apology necessary.
516.5A general, that reads exactly the same as C, freestanding temporary signs. Looks like cut and paste.
I'm sorry, Terry, you said 5, 16, 5. What was the rest of that?
Page 169 and page 170. Maybe I didn't read close enough. And we can take that offline. So.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure I follow the question.
Okay, let's take that one offline. I'll email Michelle or talk to Michelle after this meeting. Really dumb question. What's to stop you having one swing side and then one yard type on the same lot?
So the swing sign is, I don't think there is anything, the short answer, that would prohibit you from having a swing sign and a yard sign. In some cases, the swing sign can be, attached to the yard sign. But I don't believe there's anything prohibiting that. Is that a concern that the board would have, allowing both of those on the same lot?
It's just struck me as a way of getting around the maximum number of signs per lot. You have 3 signs of different types.
And I do think that was somewhat purposeful. When you get into the different types of yard signs, you'll see in some of the footnotes that you can't combine some with others. Okay. But say, the swing sign, didn't want to necessarily prevent someone from putting up a swing sign, which would be a common real estate type of sign, but also putting a yard sign in because they're selling their house and they're having a garage sale and they want to put a garage sale sign up. Or if they have a son or daughter that's graduating from high school and they want to put a sign up, or any other free speech type of sign. So that is the reason that you don't see a lot of restrictions and kind of doubling up on some of these things.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. So the other thing I think I see is that we will specifically ban things like feather signs or the Michelin Man, the blow-up type sign. Those are specifically gone, right? Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Any other comments? If not, we can move on to the next section. Let's move on to the next section then. Thank you.
Yeah, slide, sorry.
Thanks. Section 516.6 addresses illuminated signs and electronic signs, which has been, as the board knows, a somewhat hot topic. This section largely remains unchanged from the current code with one notable change. The town is proposing to allow electronic signs in more locations than the code currently permits. So I know that there's been a push from some vocal members of the public to see more of this. The staff has heard some of that and found a way to accommodate a bit more, although it might not be as much as everybody would want. Currently, electronic signs are only allowed at gas stations, and they're only allowed to display time, temperature, and these are all content-based regulations. So we had to kind of reimagine how we were going to regulate this in a way that wouldn't land the town in legal jeopardy. So based on some stakeholder feedback indicating a desire to see more electronic advertising in town, and there's kind of a review of best practices and what some other communities are doing as well. Staff's now proposing to allow all existing electronic signs to remain, so nothing has to come down. Remove limits concerning sign content, again, temperature, gas price, time, those have to go, they're content-based. And allowing new electronic signs to be installed in 4 zoning districts, the CAC, RAC, CC, and IM, subject to meeting design standards, which we've incorporated into the code here. Just to summarize them quickly, the design standards allow electronic signs in ground-mounted applications only and limit the number of electronic signs to 1 per property. The proposed code is, again, a bit more permissive than the current code, which reflects, constituent sentiment and increased prevalence of these signs. We're seeing more of them, but while at the same time preserving a reasonable aesthetic control. The idea was not to, open this up and turn it into, a rolling movie screen as you drive down the street. There's a host of public safety and aesthetic concerns that are very real, and we didn't feel that was a good fit for the town. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has concerning the illuminated sign regulations.
Any board comments or questions? Sanjay, go ahead.
Why would we not allow it in, the BAC, NAC, and other zones? Could we not say allow electronic signs in all zones except, let's say, the town center or some specific ones? Subject to, of course, ensuring, it's not a distraction and all of that. But why just limit it to these 4 zones?
So I'll give the general answer, and then I'll let Michelle step in and fill in anything I miss. The 4 zoning districts that were identified or are identified in the draft are the 4 zoning districts where I believe gas stations are allowed as a use. So under the current code, only gas stations could have it. Now we're expanding it to allow any business that can, in those zoning districts, that can meet the design criteria in the code to have an electronic sign. With the idea of being, let's gradually open this up. We don't want to, drastically change the character of the community just yet. And, if that works, then maybe there's an increased appetite for it in the future. But we're really focused on the districts that have gas stations now because they're already interfacing and experiencing these signs. It's kind of built in at this point. People kind of expect to see these signs in those areas, and they might not have that same expectation elsewhere.
I think Greg did a great job of addressing it. That is why those 4 districts are selected. It really is a policy question, and a lot of it has to do with aesthetics, community character. Also, a lot of studies out there about electronic signs and distraction with vehicles.
Well, I mean, we need to think about that broader term, right? We are in the sign code, we are kind of restricting this, as opposed to, I'm just being torn apart here. I'm just thinking, if we are going to allow, might as well allow for everything, right? And it's a sign. And I'm not sure how much it's going to impact the character. We are anyway allowing businesses to come around everywhere. So if the businesses are going to be in pretty much all the districts, why would we not allow them to have signs that they can promote and reuse? Especially where we want businesses and residents all within walking distances. So we are going to now go and approve a lot more BACs kind of things and NAC kind of things. So why would we not allow them as well?
Sanjay, I'm going to move on. Let's sort of circle back to that if we
Yeah.
want to discuss that as a board.
Sure.
Vice Chairperson Langston. Lee, go ahead.
I think we covered it. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any other board member comments on this one? So we could have a short board discussion about the point that Sanjay brought up. I think if I can summarize, what this proposal does is to keep things pretty close to what we have today, but open it up a little bit to, of necessity, open it up to other businesses within those zoning districts. So it would be a policy change, I think, if we were to suggest that we should open that to NAC and BAC, for example. And that might be something that's perhaps better if we just flag that as an item for discussion that the council might want to decide. Any thoughts on that from other members of the board?
I think it's a good balance now. I'm weary of having a bunch of signs at a shopping center that's going to have 20 different people, each with 10 seconds rotating by. I don't know that I love opening this up to everywhere in town. I mean, I kind of like the fact that it is somewhat limited. I mean, having gas stations with a sign that can change is pretty key, and I think that's helpful. It actually probably looks better than like the stick-on, pieces. So I feel like we don't lose much by allowing that. But if we started expanding this to everywhere, I'm just a little leery of that.
Thank you, Lee. Member Toterai, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so I would have to agree on that. I'm a little concerned about opening this up to, just additional signage in electronic format, and particularly because I don't know how it evolves, right? So I wanted to get an understanding of, are there similar instances with similar sized towns who have followed this path, and what does that lead to? So, obviously you don't want to get to a Vegas night strip, and you want to have people to have also reasonable signage, and there's got to be a middle ground. But I think this is a reasonable approach. I wouldn't take it further.
Thank you, Tim. So, Sanjay, are you comfortable with that we're going to just leave things as they are?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm just suggesting that, I like to be more consistent rather than being, selective. There will be more and more businesses who should come back and ask us, if you are going to allow it to businesses in RAC, why are we being left out? And we may have to have a valid justification for it. right? That's the point. Especially, and since we are opening these things up beyond the gas stations, within those zones.
Okay. Well, unless the board feels otherwise, I think what I'm hearing is we'll leave this written as it is, which is a small step. And then there's always the possibility of changing that in the future. So let's move on to the next section, which is reserved, 5.1.7. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next and last section is definitions, and we revised UDO section 11.4.3 to incorporate new definitions, many of which relate to these new content-neutral sign types that we've discussed this evening. As I mentioned earlier, content-neutral sign types are a lot less descriptive than their content-based counterparts, despite the fact that they're more legally defensible. So we have included definitions to describe these sign types. We've included some graphics as well, again, with an eye towards trying to make this as user-friendly as possible. New definitions include fence wrap sign, vehicle sign, swing sign, things like that aren't currently found in the sign code. Many of the other definitions that didn't relate to content, including how to measure signs, things like that, those definitions remained unchanged. We didn't touch those. We just identified the content-based ones, removed them, and replaced them with the necessary content-neutral equivalent. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has about the definitions.
Any board member comments, questions? Seeing none, we'll move along.
And that's it. That concludes my formal or Zoom presentation anyway for the evening. I thank the board again for your time on this special board meeting night, and happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, I think there's a section which is 9.5 non-conforming signs. Maybe we...
Yes. So we flagged that in the draft because it's pertinent to the conversation of not creating new nonconformities, but no changes were made to that section. It remains the same as it is today. Just, I guess, in short, this section addresses what happens when a sign was built before the regulations were adopted and doesn't comply with those new regulations, what rules it needs to follow. So this was included, I believe, in the original sign code when it was adopted. And again, we haven't touched it or changed it with this update.
Okay, very good. Any other board comments? Michelle, do you have anything to wrap it up, or are you?
I'm trying to go through my scribbles here, but if I could, see if my notes kind of match up with the board's understanding. Under the purpose section, there was a question about some of the regulations that specifically talk about motorists and looking at expanding on that. Ground-mounted sign type A, particularly the residential category, giving a little bit more thought there to developments that have more than one entrance. Right now it's 2 per zoning lot. We could potentially do something like 2 per development entrance if you'd like, but I have a note next to that one. Ground-mounted signs type B, kind of a question mark by that one. Not sure if it needs any additional discussion. Sorry, I just kind of wrote on this as we went along, so bear with me a second.
You're good. That's fine.
Fence wrap signs, double check in the statute on that to see if it's possible to adjust that at all. potentially looking at painting and chalk in the road right away and specifically prohibiting that. And that's all that I have written down.
Okay. So I think then we are ready for a motion if somebody would like to propose a motion. So we actually need two motions, the consistency statement and the recommendation on the ordinance itself. So I'm looking to a voting member to propose a motion. When we bring up the draft motions on the screen, would that help, or can they see them anyway?
I do not have those drafts actually in the PDF.
I did.
All right, I think,
You have
one
okay,
up
great.
at your seats.
so I think Vice Chairperson Langston, I think you maybe were going to propose a motion.
Yeah, I have a draft here of that.
Thank you.
Do we need to reference the comments that Michelle just went over in the motion, or is that sort of a given that you're going to pass that along as your recommendation?
I would suggest that she's going to pass that along, maybe discuss that with Mr. Jones and
Okay.
see what needs to be
All right,
done.
then I'm just go with it as presented. So I, as required by General Statute 160A-383, I hereby move to recommend approval of Resolution 2020-286-0 of the Morrisville Town Council pertaining to the adoption of a plan of consistency review statement for text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance related to a comprehensive update of the sign regulations. The proposed text amendments amend the sign regulations in various sections of the Unified Development. These revisions support Policy 2A in the town's adopted land by promoting development that fosters a sense of place by improving the character of the built environment, including visually appealing buildings, streetscapes, amenities, and public spaces. In addition, the amendments are needed to bring the town's sign regulations into conformance with the Supreme Court decision in Reed v. Town of Gilbert. Therefore, the text amendments are consistent with the Town of Morrisville's adopted plans and are reasonable and in the public interest.
Thank you, Lee. Do I have a second for that motion? I recognize Sanjay Acharya. Do you second that motion?
Yes.
Thank you. So we'll call for a vote. Ask Marty to do the roll call vote.
Member Acharya,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Langston,
Aye.
Member Sack,
Aye.
Member Toterai,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Pritchard.
Aye.
The motion was approved. The consistency statement was approved unanimously.
Thank you very much.
All right, I will. I hereby recommend that the Town Council approve Ordinance 20-8-0 of the Morrisville Town Council approving text to United Development related to a comprehensive update of the sign regulations.
Thank you, Lee. Do I have a second for that motion? I see that Member Acharya has seconded that. Go ahead. We'll ask Marty to do the roll call vote.
Member Acharya,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Langston,
Aye.
Member Sack,
Aye.
Member Toterai,
Aye.
Chairman Pritchard.
Aye.
The ordinance was approved unanimously.
Thank you very much. That concludes that part of it. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for bearing with us on our questions. It's been a long journey, 3 years or so, I think.
It's been a bit. Thank you, guys. They were great questions, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk with the board again. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Very good. All right, we'll move on to the rest of our agenda, which, from memory, I think is staff comments.
I don't have anything for you this evening.
Okay. Any board comments?
No.
Silence is golden. Okay. So I think the next item is actually called for adjournment, I believe. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
So I heard Vice Chairperson Langston move that we adjourn. Do I have a second to that motion?
Second.
I think that was Tim Toterai. Thank you very much. Roll call vote.
Okay, Member Acharya,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Langston,
Aye.
Member Sack,
Aye.
Member Toterai,
Aye.
Chairman Pritchard.
Aye.
The motion to adjourn is approved.
We're adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.